A rarity on university campuses, a peaceful conference on a college campus designed to critique progressivism on campus. Next on Campus Roundup. Hey, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment focuses on a recent crisis in American education gathering held at Franciscan University of Steubenville, a Catholic university. To talk more about this, we welcome Jeremiah Poff, a journalism major at Franciscan University and a journalist at the College Fix. Jeremiah, thank you for being here, and you were part of this conference at your school, Franciscan University. Talk a little bit about who put this together, what was its purpose, and how did the whole conference come off?
So it was essentially set up by the Veritas Center for Public Ethics, which is a academic organization here at the Franciscan University. It's chaired by Ann Hendershot, who's the chairman of the sociology department. And then it is also made up of other faculty, mostly in political science, such as Dr. Benjamin Weicker, Dr. Stephen Crayson are the primary ones as well. But they put this conference on because they felt a need to address the widespread problems facing colleges nowadays and students, both freedom of speech and just, I mean, that was how they advertised it primarily, but it covered a wide range of topics, as we see in the two pieces that I wrote about this conference for the College Fix.
Well, was the conference well attended, and were there any protesters? How did that play out? Were there any dissent there among the students?
It was really not well attended by students. It was mostly just a bunch of faculty that really went, as well as the other speakers there. There was a few students that did show up. There wasn't any protests or dissenters really. They kind of they know that they're going into a hostile environment if they come to a place like this, like Franciscan, which is one of the most conservative colleges in the country.
It's remarkable, isn't it, that you have a very few handful of conservative colleges across this country, places like Franciscan, places like Hillsdale, where we can have all kinds of speech conversations, even provocative ones, and there never seems to be the level of outrage, anger, and downright sanctioning or censoring of the Second Amendment, and the First Amendment, that you get in all the big liberal colleges. When you're reporting a story like this, Jeremiah, what angles do you take? How did you decide what aspects of this really interesting conference you're going to focus on?
So I sent when I found out about this conference, I was like, this is really something interesting that might draw a lot of attention. That could draw a lot of attention, especially to show some of the stuff that the university is doing to kind of be a different perspective compared to other colleges around the country that have seen so many issues when they're censoring conservative speech and whatnot. In this particular case, I sent the agenda of the conference to my editor, Greg Piper, and he recommended that I cover both the Gurian and the Dershowitz talks, and then another piece on a free speech panel that featured Paul Griffiths, a free speech martyr, basically at Duke University, who's a theology professor there.
Yeah, Professor William Dershowitz, formerly of Yale, is a big advocate arguing about the idea that we're not teaching kids at college to be critical thinkers, right? And I think a conference like this sheds light on that broadly. We're teaching kids to react and be angry and be political, but we're not teaching them to think critically. What else can you tell us about Professor Dershowitz's comments?
So he really made a real point to say how students nowadays are basically just shepherded like sheep through the college system, and he's written a book about this, and he talked a lot about how you go and there's really nothing you really learn when you go to college. It's just an indoctrination in the sense of you're given this information. And he talked about how he would grade his papers, and how when students would write, they would check all the boxes for an A paper, and then he would turn around and be like, something's not right here. And he would read it, and you're like, "There's just not any personality to this paper. It's flat. There's nothing real. The student isn't adding anything to this paper." And so he started giving those papers A minuses, and started working with the students to try to help them find an intellectual voice, so that they were learning to think and not just accept every information that they were being spoon-fed.
Right. These papers became formulaic, right? It's not about individual thought. It's not about emotion and personality. It's, like you said, formulaic, ticking off boxes, as the professor said. The other professor that really stood out is Professor Vigan Gorian at the University of Virginia, who made some eye-opening comments about the radical sexualization on college campuses. It seems we're willing to censor school kids, university kids, for almost anything except their sexual behavior, which we encourage to be just shockingly libertine.
Yeah, completely accurate. He is very much. He talks a lot about how we really need to bring back same-sex dormitories, or not dormitories, same-sex colleges, because there's less of a distraction when you have the mix, when you don't have the mixing of the sexes, and the thing is that now, it's a sexual free-for-all at all colleges nowadays. Obviously, at Franciscan, it's not really that case. We're a very devout Catholic institution. We have very strict visitation rules between the sexes, and I think that really actually helps foster a stronger relationship between the sexes, rather than the debauchery that you see and the hookup culture that has taken over other colleges nationwide.
To read more stories like Jeremiah's, follow the College Fix on Twitter and Facebook. Jeremiah Poff, thanks again for an important and well-written story. We appreciate your time today. Time now for Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today I'm joined by College Fix Associate Editor Greg Piper for a conversation about a recent Crisis in American Education gathering held at Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio, a Catholic university. Greg, well, it's a remarkable thing. I can't think of any time over the last 20 years where we've actually had a conference held on a university site that actually went after the politics, the ideology, and the sort of failed worldview of what's taking place in many of our campuses. Can you talk a little bit about the background for this story?
Sure. This is a story brought to us by reporter Jeremiah Poff. He goes to Franciscan. He thought this would be really interesting to have an entire conference devoted to the stuff that we cover pretty much every day. With all these speakers in one place to really give people a good overview over a couple days of what is the crisis of higher ed, from the intellectual side, the student debt side, the sexual libertinism, as one speaker put it, simply the problems that a lot of people have with what students are being taught, what they're getting for their money, and how it's kind of you could say brainwashing them, or simply kind of dumbing them down from thinking independently when they're surrounded by people who are kind of telling them what to say, and they kind of soak it in, and maybe they're not equipped to fight back against it.
Well, one of the highlights of the conference was a sort of a freewheeling discussion about speech on campus, which is one of the main issues that we all have to deal with. Can you talk a little bit about how that particular discussion went, that open forum?
Sure. It was interesting because it featured one professor who we have covered a little bit over the years, Paul Griffiths, who is about to retire from Duke Divinity School. He basically called the faculty diversity training, which is optional there, a waste of time. He told people you should think about using your time differently. It's not going to be productive for you. And he pretty much walked right into you could say a witch hunt against him. Where administrators came out against him, other faculty basically said you shouldn't be saying these things publicly. And he made himself persona non grata, and he just got tired of it and decided he was going to leave.
Yeah, whenever I hear that argument from university professors, you shouldn't be saying those things publicly, my hackles go up. It's the implication that you're not wrong to say them. You just can't say them publicly. I assume that was kind of the gist of his comments at the forum?
Yeah, he was talking about how when you have someone, especially when you have faculty gang up on someone who is brave enough to say that thing, even internally, this is an internal email thread. You gang up on them. You pretty much tell other faculty who may agree or who may partially agree, who may have something useful to contribute to the conversation, that you just shouldn't talk about that. You're going to go through this same kind of year-long harassment. It's basically university-directed harassment. If you say something like this, if you so much as say, I disagree, but I want to interject this new thought here and try to modify maybe what my colleague here is saying. And so the result is people simply don't say these things. They get quiet. They just kind of retreat to their own silo. And you have an academy that simply does not have this kind of robust intellectual internal debate, and students are missing out because of it.
One of the interesting things about the entire process at Steubenville and at Franciscan University is that despite the fact that we had a conference that was really questioning the mores and the values of this progressivism on campus, the whole thing came off without any protests. Everything ran smoothly. People respected the rights of all sorts of people to speak and dissent. This seemed to be a model of the way we should be doing things in colleges and universities.
It is really unusual for how easily it came off. There were not protesters, as far as we know, who tried to rush or break in or shout down anyone. I think that really speaks well of Franciscan administrators to really set the tone for what a conference should be, and to make clear that there are going to be penalties if students try to interrupt, if they stand up and shout down, if they try to intimidate speakers as they're going in. This is the kind of thing we see a lot more often in other contexts, like what we just saw at the City University of New York Law School in the past week, where a law professor came in who was really not a firebrand at all. He's simply a kind of conservative to libertarian professor, a very nerdy, wonky guy who was simply talking about free speech on campus, and people treated him like a white supremacist because he had a fairly nuanced view of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and a nuanced view is simply unacceptable for a lot of student activists.
Right, and one of the deans at that campus, this is a law school for goodness sake, one of the deans of the law school came out and actually said that the using free speech to shout down the speech of the professor is itself free speech and therefore defensible. So free speech is defensible to shout down the free speech of other people to stop them from talking. It is remarkable, but I suppose on the other side of that coin, we have another story from a New York school where a group of administrators basically told a group of student protesters, that if you continue to do this, we're going to pull your financial aid. Called the parents of those kids and let the parents know that your children were in danger of losing their housing money, losing their money from the federal government, their tuition assistance, if they don't cease and desist immediately from occupying a school building. And within 40 hours, all the kids had vanished back to their rooms. Why aren't we doing more of that on college campuses?
That was really unusual at New York University. Part of the issue there is that the students were trying to stay overnight in a building, and the university said no one gets to stay overnight in a building. That's the one line you can't cross. And they basically threatened them that you will start disciplinary proceedings. You could lose your financial aid. You could get kicked out of housing based on how that turns out. That was unusual because you would have expected that these administrators would have faced very severe criticism for going that far. And I'm frankly not really sure why they didn't. I think there's a fear among a lot of folks that if they stand up to student activists, if they threaten them and say you will incur disciplinary proceedings that could go in this direction, that they're going to face just a giant national protest, and they're going to be in the media and they're going to look bad. And there's simply this fear. I think when you actually do stand up to student activists and you explain why, and you point to policy and you point to how they're fighting actually intellectually robust debate, then you can often get them to stand down or at least negotiate in a more normal way, the way that student activists historically have done, where you make an appointment, you go in, you talk to an administrator, and you're part of kind of this ongoing dialogue instead of this, we'll shut everything down until you give us what we want.
Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix editors by joining us on all of our social media platforms. Greg Piper, Associate Editor of the College Fix, thanks so much for your time today. So yes, believe it or not, we've actually had a conference in Steubenville, Ohio, at the Franciscan University, Catholic University, that deals with the crisis in American education, and that allowed conservative voices to speak without being shouted down or drowned out. There were no protests, there were no occupation of buildings, there were no bricks thrown. It was a remarkable thing. A bunch of scholars got together to talk about conservative critiques of university progressive policies, and no bad things happened. See, I love final fixes like this because it means there's not much to say. I do have one piece, nothing to gripe about, nothing to critique, one piece of advice to my progressive friends on college campuses. You'd probably go a lot farther in advancing your progressive agenda if you allowed conservative professors to speak and conservative students to speak rather than simply shouting them down. If you really, really want to make hay with your progressive progressive cause, let us talk. There's way more of you than there are of us. And by shouting us down, you're making enemies where you otherwise might have allies. Hate to give advice to the progressive left, but let us have our voices heard. I think you're going to find that you'll move forward, and maybe we'll be able to pull you back a little bit to ourselves, and then you have, lo and behold, what universities used to be, places of free speech. And that's the final fix. I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time. For more videos and original articles, visit thecollegefix.com. And don't forget to like The College Fix on Facebook and follow on Twitter to receive your daily dose of right-minded news and commentary from across the nation.